Hello, I'm Martha Engber, host of Vigilant Positivity, a blog and podcast meant to decrease polarization by uniting Americans through civil discussion that leads to common ground. Thanks to those of you who've tuned in. Please feel free to subscribe and grow the common ground movement. Every month, I try to do a citizen spotlight to cast a light on other Americans who are on both sides of the political spectrum and working hard to decrease polarization. Today, I'm talking with Doug Teschner. Hello, Doug.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. Doug is grateful he had the opportunity to serve our nation in various ways, including as an elected Republican member of the New Hampshire House of Representatives. He represented our country overseas as a Peace Corps volunteer and country director, serving in Morocco, Ukraine, and several African nations. Now he volunteers with Braver Angels, a national nonprofit dedicated to uniting Americans through civil discussion. He serves as New England regional leader and works with elected officials to develop their skills and commitment to work together across political differences, an initiative known as Braver Politics. He's especially proud of a 3-year effort that led to the creation of the Granite Bridge Legislative Alliance, a caucus of Republican and Democratic legislators in New Hampshire, working to foster positive relationships across the political divide. While he could have chosen to enjoy a relaxing retirement, he instead feels called to help address the stark problems of division and polarization facing our nation. But I think Doug left out the best part, that he is helping to write Beyond the Politics of Contempt, Practical Steps to Build Positive Relationships in Divided Times. He's co-authoring the book with Becky Robinson and Beth Mallow, a past guest on this podcast. The book will be out this summer. Welcome.
Well, welcome and thanks for that nice introduction. I'm 75 years old. I'm not getting any younger, but I've had a really good life and a real interesting life, and I had a lot of great experiences and I've been to a lot of interesting places. But I'm concerned. I'm concerned about our country and where we're headed. And this is how I first got involved with this group, Braver Angels, back in 2019. And we had a convention that was right before, by the way. It was right before COVID, right? And that was such a crazy time in our country. And I went to a couple workshops, and then everything kind of shut down. But we started doing work on Zoom, and I've been very active ever since. And finally in last not last well, it was summer of 2023. We had a convention. A national convention was held in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and people came from all around the country. Obviously, Gettysburg was chosen for an obvious reason, and we were asked at the opening session to write on a card, "Why are you here?" And I wrote because I worry that my grandchildren are not going to enjoy the benefits of this country that I've had. And that's sort of propelled me forward with sort of a New Year's resolution I made a year and a half ago to write this book, thinking it wouldn't be that difficult to process. But we're finally about a year and a half in, and we're about to have we're about to get it published, and it's been a long, arduous journey, but I'm very excited about it, and I'm excited and concerned about how we're going to get past this deep division that we're all living through.
Well, I enjoyed reading the article you wrote for the Substack blog that you and your co-writers publish. It's called Together Across Differences. And on this Substack, you're offering updates about your book. The essay that I read was titled A Tribute to Civility, Braver Angels, and Peter Yarrow, who, for those of you who don't know, is the Peter in the 1960s folk group Peter, Paul, and Mary. You write about the unpleasant moment that led to the eventual writing of the book. Can you tell us about that?
Well, there was probably a lot of unpleasant moments, but the one I'm thinking about was when I came when I came home, I was overseas for most of the period between 2002 and 2016, except for a couple of years. And I remember coming back, and I was at an outdoor concert in my community, and there was another former legislator there, and I set up my lawn chair next to them and just got kind of chatting with them, and but of course quickly the subject turned to politics and who voted for who in 2016, and the conversation got a little nasty. And I said, wait a minute. I walked away that day and I said, wow, I got to do better. I got to do better when it comes to these relationships, and that and I had been following this division even from overseas. I was reading about it and hearing about it and thinking, what's going on back home? And now I was home and I was kind of caught up in it. And you mentioned Peter Yarrow. I got to know Peter Yarrow in Ukraine in 2010. Some of my Peace Corps volunteers he's of Ukrainian descent. Some of my Peace Corps volunteers invited him to Ukraine because he had he created a nonprofit called Operation Respect with a bunch of really interesting songs, using songs as an anti-bullying in schools in particular. And some of my volunteers thought that would be useful, and they invited Peter. And I'm sure he came because his family had come from Ukraine initially, but he came multiple times, and I got to know him. He even did a concert in my living room for some of my friends, like a dozen people. Um, and in any case, when in 2019, I was home now. It was 9 years later from when I first met Peter, and he was giving a concert with Noel Paul Stuckey, the Paul of Peter, Paul, and Mary. Mary had been dead a while, and Peter just died very recently. I was quite sad about that as I was writing the book, but he gave a concert, and I went, and afterwards I got to see him on stage. He gave me a big hug, and he said, "Doug, I got to tell you about this group called Better Angels." It was called Better Angels initially, after the Abraham Lincoln quote. And he had been involved with an early workshop, and there was a movie that he was in, and he sent me the link, and I said, this is the kind of thing I'm interested in. And I went to a couple of workshops, and I was hooked. So that's how I first got involved. But I think I was just looking at the country, looking at my own behavior. How can I do better? And that's what really brought me to Braver Angels, where I've been very active over the last now almost 6 years.
Well, that's what I was going to ask is, did you at one time look at those with a different political viewpoint as the problem with America?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I mean, to me, what's happened is it's just been this erosion of that. I mean, it used to be like when I was in the state legislature here in New Hampshire from 1988 to 98, and then we came back in 2000 to 2002. And yeah, we had some difficult fights and different big disagreements, and it's hard. Politics is hard. But people, for the most part, really got along and didn't really personalize it. And something really happened. It really started to happen, I think, late in my service. I think, in the 1990s, it sort of took off. Probably Newt Gingrich, I think, was influential in that, at the congressional level, because he went after the Republican leadership and thought they were too cozy with the Democratic leadership, and Gingrich took a majority. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when you disagree with people, fine, disagree. We have differences of opinion. Of course, people are going to disagree. People should disagree. This is how democracy works. This is how our government is supposed to work. The problem is when people personalize it, and it becomes, if you don't agree with me, that means you're evil or you're stupid or you don't love our country. And this is where the line gets crossed. So it's not about agreement. It's not about kumbaya and we've got to compromise, although maybe those things can happen if you actually have relationships. It's much more about how we think about the people who have different political views. And that had really deteriorated. In fact, when I was overseas, I had heard there was a show on, I don't know if you're familiar with that NPR show, This American Life.
Oh,
And
yes.
I had heard they had done a segment on New Hampshire in the legislature because the legislature had gotten pretty divisive. I was aware of that after I had left. And I went on, I dug up, found the link, and I listened to it. And that was interesting. But there was another segment where people were talking about disagreeing around politics. And I remember vividly one guy said, well, I'll still invite my brother-in-law to my barbecue, but he's got to bring his own meat
Oh,
because he voted for Obama. And I'm thinking, what? What? When did politics become so essential to people's identities? Sure, I don't agree. I voted for whoever it was back then. Whoever against Obama, was it Romney or, but does that mean, it used to be people's identities had so many dimensions to it. How we saw other people, their hobbies, their work, their families, but somehow politics has become so central to people's identity that we're creating this us versus them mentality. And of course, when I got home, not to say I didn't, it's not like I never came back, but when I was really living at home and I had that one experience that we talked about earlier, this is a problem. This is a real problem for our country. We got to figure out a way to get past this. Remember the famous, I mean, Abraham Lincoln is such an inspiration, but what did he say after the Civil War about let's bind up the wounds and these people are our brothers and the better angels of our nature. He didn't demonize the people in the Confederacy. It was we're all here together. We have to figure it out. And this is the concern I have, and this is what's sort of driven me to this work and writing this book.
well, can you pinpoint a moment that caused you to see the power of uniting Americans?
The power of uniting America.
Well, for
Well,
example,
sure. I
when
mean,
I,
okay. Let's talk about 2001 and what happened in the 9/11 events
Mhm,
and how people came together after that. And you remember George Bush, the younger Bush, was the president.
mhm.
And he made a point of saying, let's not demonize the Muslims. I mean, these people, the people that did this are terrorists, but let's not, the Americans that live here and the Muslims, they're our brothers, they're our sisters, and we did come together uh, in that event. Um, but now I mean, if our country was invaded, I wonder if we'd be able to handle it, or if we're just going to blame the other party. Uh, we've got to figure out a way to get come back together as a nation and see the humanity in all of our citizens.
Well, I guess that's what I was talking about in terms of when I first joined Braver Angels, that immediately I could see the power of it because I think that the people who are extreme on either side are a relatively small percentage, whereas there are a lot of people who are more or less in the middle, who do not have extreme ideas and who more or less want the country to run in a reasonable, normal, non-extreme fashion. And so that is kind of the moment I thought, wow, uniting Americans can really be the way to go. It could really be the trick. And so that's what I was asking you is have you seen evidence of that potential or, are you convinced or maybe it's you're not sure
Well,
if it'll happen.
I'm glad you brought that up because there's a really interesting study was done in 2018, the Hidden Tribes report, and we talk
Right.
about it a lot in our book. And in the Hidden Tribes report, they did a lot of research of people across the country, and they politically put people in, I think it's 7 different categories. And but the people on the extremes are the ones that are driving the agenda. And according to them, there was sort of 9% of people on the left and 25% of people on the right. And the rest of the people they put in the exhausted majority. And we're not convinced about the 25% people on the right either, because they got all the conservatives. And I mean, I know a lot of conservatives who are not who are having to adopt this sort of we've got to vanquish the other side. I mean, that's the mentality of the people on the extremes. We've got to vanquish the other side. Well, what does that mean? Vanquish the other side? Are we going to have a civil war here? What's your intent? What's your goal? And one of the things I ask people is, what's your goal with how you see politics and how and your own personal behavior? And if it's, we're just going to push those people away, us versus them, and we're going to try to conquer them. I guess, you can conquer them at the polls, I suppose, but the country's divided. But the point here is, though, that a lot of people are not, don't, there is a huge, what we call, what those authors call the exhausted majority. There are people who have political opinions, but they're really troubled by this deep division. But it's the people in the extremes that drive politics, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons is the way the primary systems are working now. You only get people, it's very hard to run for office if you're not down the line with your party. When I was in the legislature, we had like pro-life Democrats, pro-choice Republicans. Nowadays, if you don't just hold the party line, you're going to get primaried, and a small percentage of people come out for primary elections, and they controls who are the people in the Congress, and to a large extent in the state legislatures too. I mean, another big factor is just that the people's behavior has deteriorated in general. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with Robert Putnam, but he wrote a famous book, Bowling Alone, and he's got a new book called The Upswing. But Putnam says, one of the problems in a big problem in society is people aren't part of civic organizations or churches or bowling leagues, is the example he used. People are bowling alone. And when you're part of civic groups, you're interfacing with other people. But people are now more siloed in their own little groups, in their own political groups, people who reinforce their own behavior. And in the second book, The Upswing, Putnam talks about, there was a period, the Gilded Age, and it's interesting. I've seen this sort of come up again. This is a period when there was very strong, wealthy people really controlled politics back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it was kind of a dark period of where it was a lot of us versus them kind of thinking. And then there was what he called the upswing that began right around 1900 up to about 1960, he says. And then there's all these factors that now we're going downhill again. And it's how he talks about thinking in terms of I, or thinking in terms of we. We become very kind of self-centered in our own thinking, and less willing to engage with other people. And part of it is because people are not as engaged in social networks and in situations where they might meet people with different political views. We're very siloed now, and just mostly interacting with people who kind of think the same way we do.
So you're seeing a lot of sources. For example, the end of Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision that allowed dark money to pour into campaigns, the rise of social media, perhaps um, the end of the fairness doctrine that required broadcasters to uh, provide fair time to equal time between viewpoints, differing viewpoints,
Well, I think
that
there's a
kind of
lot of
thing.
factors. I think there's a lot of factors that go into it, and we do talk about this quite a bit in our book. But let's talk about social media and what's happened with social media. And to me, it's not social media per se as much as it is the algorithms of social media. The algorithms are really set up to keep people online as long as possible, and they do that by sort of playing on our fears, and just we only see things that kind of reinforce what we already saw. When it comes to any kind of news, I mean, of course they do with advertising. They're trying to sell you things. If they know, if you go online and and looking for shoes. The next thing you know, you're going to see shoes on your Facebook feed. But when it comes to politics, people are being kind of fed stuff that kind of reinforces your own views. It's confirmation bias. And a big factor in this is what Amanda Ripley calls the conflict entrepreneurs. These are people
Oh,
who
right.
are these are people who are who are dividing us for their own power or their own financial benefit to a large extent. And we know from our Brave Angel workshops, you can get people in the room who have very different political views, and if you in the right kind of a structured environment, they can really talk to each other. They can listen to each other. They find out they have a lot more common ground than they thought. But these conflict entrepreneurs are convincing us that we don't have common ground, that those people are the enemy. And there's foreign influence too, like the Russians, the Iranians, the Chinese are also exploiting the social media algorithms. Yeah. So there's a lot of different factors that have gone into this for sure.
Well, considering all of that, as you know, probably according to Erica Chenoweth, a political scientist at Harvard University, it takes 3.5% of a population to take part in protests to be taken seriously. uh, Actually have legislators say we need to pay attention because this is a thing. Some organizers believe that holds true for creating movements. If applied to America, that's 12 million people would need to get involved to create a common ground movement. Do you see that happening? And if so, how?
That's a great question. And these are conversations I've had with folks at Braver Angels that I think we need to focus more on how do we do good with the workshops and we have these alliances, these chapters in different states. But the question, how do you create a movement? That's what we're a movement for change, the movement that says we need a better system. And this is not just, I mean, of course, people are free to protest if they don't like Donald Trump or if they don't like Joe Biden or whatever. Or they don't like those policies. That's fine. Although I'd encourage people to think about how are you going to bring more people over to your side? How can you protest at the same time that you're inviting people and not pushing them away? But maybe that's a little different topic. But how do we create a social movement? And there's a wonderful book by a woman named Leslie Crutchfield, How Change Happens, and we refer to that in our book. And she's done a lot of research on movements and what was what brought them to what made them successful versus not successful. For instance, she talks about the uh, the gun movement. The NRA was much more in building a grassroots movement, whereas the people who were against guns were more trying to focus on Congress. But if you've got to create a movement of you've got to create a movement where of grassroots movement is one of the six factors that she talks about are critical. So in Braver Angels, I think some of those six factors we're doing well on, but I think if Braver Angels we want to lead a movement for change, we need to step back and really look at it and look for ways that we can create more impact. Because I do think, and I like that reference to the 5%. I think there's people protesting now, and that's fine. But we need more people who are standing up and say, "Wait a minute, this system is broken. It's not working for any of us." And one of the strengths I think for Braver Angels is we've always tried to have what we call red-blue balance. Have had people on, and when I see a lot of the more pro-democratic movements I see in the country or organizations, they tend to be lean heavy on the blue side. And you got to find you got to get the Republicans and conservatives and people at the table too. And I know that's something we've really worked hard on at Brave Angels. Not to say we can't do better.
Yeah, that's I guess been a question for a while now. As a person who is red leaning, do you have an idea about why more blue leaning folks might be interested in coming together for this purpose, or and conservative folks are a little leery of it?
Well, that's a great. I think there's a lot of reasons. I mean, one of the things we came up with, one of them is, what is the language you're using? What are the, what are the words you're using? Words have become so politicized. Uh, Dialogue, for instance, tends to be a blue-leaning word. It's sad to see a lot of these words that had just had a normal meaning have somehow been politicized. But debate, I know debate is something that the Reds tend to appreciate more. Um, but how do I think we got to look. How do you make it more welcoming for people? How do people? These are the challenges, and people got to feel when if they come that they want to come back, and that they're and I see it now with my liberal friends. There's just a lot of angst about Donald Trump, and and they're angry. And okay, fine, be angry. But again, how do you invite other people to the table? And I think people have to be curious. This is a little bit what's missing. Stephen Covey, the great, the Seven Habits of Successful People. It's a wonderful book. I mean, if people haven't read it, didn't read it for a while. I was familiar with it, but when I really read it, I appreciate that the wisdom in there is so profound. And of course, one of the seven habits is listen to understand and not to reply. Listen to understand and not to reply. And we've kind of lost that now. People are quick with their responses and quick to reply or quick to offer another point of view. And it comes down to curiosity, being curious and humble too. We could use a lot more humility in how we see others people. We're so quick to judge other people. I mean, it's human nature to a certain extent. I mean, you see somebody and how they're dressed or whatever clothing they're wearing or whatever, and you kind of make some kind of judgment. I was just a half an hour, about an hour just before we came. I stopped to get I was out hiking on a mountain, and I wanted to get something to drink and a snack, and there was a guy with a MAGA hat in there. Oh gosh, I just wanted to go up to him, and I was just hoping I'd stand next to him in line, and I just wanted to ask him some questions. What do you like about Donald Trump? Tell me more. And when you do that, your people feel acknowledged and appreciated. If you do it with real curiosity, or it depends on the tone of your voice and what you bring to the table. But I think my favorite chapter in our book is about values. What are your values? What are your core values that are really important to you? I mean, this is nothing, not necessarily anything to do with politics. It's just something I think people should go through a process to really think about that. And Brene Brown, other people have talked about this. Um, and when you identify some of your core values, what's important, and then we say, okay, now that you've got your core values, I want you to think about people who voted for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris or whoever you don't like. And what are you thinking about them? What's in your at least in your mind, if not in your heart? What do you and is there any kind of a conflict there between your values, your personal values, and what you're thinking about people who have a different political orientation? Because it's going to be so important to try to solve this problem where people have to dig within themselves, be more humble, be more curious, be more willing to listen. And I'm not saying I'm that great at it. Don't get me wrong for 1 second. I mean, I make mistakes too. We all do. But I do think in the Braver Angels workshops, there's one depolarizing within where we talk about that, and another one disagree better, skills for disagreeing better, where we talk about the steps to have a conversation. And it starts with listen. And resist sharing your own opinion till you've really listened and acknowledged what the other person has to say. Then share your own opinion. And then the person might actually listen to you. If you show that you're listening to them, And what I think about this is we've sort of lost, I don't know, we don't teach this in schools anymore. I mean, people, the basic ability to have conversations. And it goes back to some of that Robert Putnam stuff that I mentioned earlier. I mean, where are we as a nation and how we treat each other? I see more people giving people a finger on the highway and more aggressive kind of behavior. That was never taught, that was never considered acceptable 20 years ago. But somehow we sort of say, oh, well, there he goes, another, guy giving me a finger on the highway. I mean, and if you really react, you might end up with road rage and somebody getting hurt. We really got to, but it has to start in here. It has to start with me. It has to start with my behavior and how I'm responding to other people. That's what we really emphasize in the book.
Well, one of the reasons I bought into Braver Angels quickly, I went to a in-person workshop and then almost immediately did an online one as well. And the Common Ground movement in general is because I've learned that positive leads to positive and negative to negative. Common Ground movement promotes positive behavior, like being kind to others who don't share your viewpoint while also trying to understand where they're coming from. But our electoral process nowadays seems to demand the opposite. Candidates are expected to do as their donors say and tear down opponents in vicious personal attacks and show strength by refusing to compromise. As a former legislator, what enforceable actions can be taken to significantly change the process?
Well, the only way we're going to change that is to when people don't vote for people to do it. I mean, there's always been negative campaigning. I mean, I'm not going to say that it's not necessarily new, but it's certainly been taken to a higher level. And like I said, the way the primary elections are working now, I mean, there are structural reforms. You mentioned the money in politics is a problem. I mean, the primaries, perhaps having open primaries, I think it would be or ranked choice voting. I think those things are really interesting. I just think it's going to be very hard to to really come up with structural reforms if we just can't find a way to talk to each other better. It has to start at that level. To build from myself out. But yes, I mean, I think these things are important, and I think if people are rewarded for bad. There's a lot of people are rewarded for bad behavior. I mean,
Well, yeah, let me point this out. Our leaders on both sides of the aisle seem to be adding fuel to the fire by passing along disinformation, personally attacking colleagues, and even private citizens, and recommending the ousting of people just doing their jobs. I mean, even if we can get a critical mass of Americans to unite, how do we get our leaders to ditch negative messaging, which is really powerful and successful?
well, it's gonna have to not work. Part of the problem, the media environment has changed so much. And nowadays, you get the headline for the most outrageous behavior gets the headline. It used to be the most outrageous behavior would maybe be considered unacceptable. But now the most outrageous behavior, even what positive, negative, whatever, is you get the top headline. I mean, Donald Trump is a master of this. I mean, this is, if you remember in 2015 when he first was running, people didn't take him that seriously. But he like sucked up all the oxygen. And, because of the way these guys sell the media sells now, you've got to have the most outrageous story is what sells media. So it's a system that's just kind of intertwined. And I think the people I think it's important for people to develop awareness of how it works, to understand conflict entrepreneurs, to understand the media environment, and say no, especially when it's on your side. This is one of the problems. We see this with people who are reaching out to people on the other side. Then they get pushed back from their own side saying, why are you talking to those people? Like there's a lot of disincentives for people to even do that, even among citizens, never mind politicians. I mean, it's a real, it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge. But I mean, awareness of what's working, how it works, how our politics are working. I think, and when enough citizens say enough,
Mm.
maybe that 5%, no, this isn't going to work for us. Uh, Things can change, but it's not going to be easy. This is hard work. But it starts in here and it moves out.
Well, I recently did a post about how Americans' happiness has consistently gone downhill for the past 30 years in a variety of factors, such as their feeling of economic security, sense of community, uh, whether they trust our government institutions. The 2025 World Happiness Report, I may have gotten the year wrong on that, but the World Happiness Report published by the University of Oxford's Well-Being Research Center lists our country as number 24 out of 143 countries. Do you think our
Yeah.
leaders have been negligent in not paying attention to that fact? And what do you think they could do immediately and differently to increase our happiness?
Boy, that's such a big topic. And it is, we think of, we've sort of messaged, happiness comes from sort of financial success. I mean, this is a little bit off the politics, but you know, happiness is gonna be a lot deeper than that. People need to have a balanced. I mean, what I'm striving for with myself is to have balance in life. You're not gonna money. Yes, you need some, but how much? And family and your relationships, investing in relationships. I one of my themes in life is honor friendships, and by that I mean I'll try to pick up the phone I've got a little list, think of my friends, and just call somebody I haven't seen in a while. Um, um, and little things like that, and I feel better about it. After I do something like that. As I'm making this observation, I'm thinking, Doug, you haven't done that in a while. You better get your act together. And it, but unfortunately, so much of our advertising is about you need the bigger car, you need the better, people are trying to sell us stuff, and I think that's part of it. But I think we've also seen a lot of economic um, um, imbalance. The middle class was bigger, and we've things have changed in ways that I think are potentially unhealthy, and we have to figure out how to get that back. How to
Well, do you
get
think our government, to some extent, I mean, in other words, the people involved in government and our leadership has dropped the ball on kind of understanding the factors that lead to happiness, like economic security, but also things like community, fostering community and, fostering trustworthiness in one another and institutions. In other words, how
Yeah, I
culpable are
do.
Hmm.
I do. I think our leaders, are so focused, and the political parties are so focused on, I mentioned the conflict entrepreneurs earlier. Who are these conflict entrepreneurs? Well, some of them are kind of obvious people that are on, the Russians or people with different kinds of websites. But I think the political parties play into it for
Mhm.
sure. I mean, it's about how we got elected, and what is the way most best way to attract voters is fear. I mean, fear, and we've got to do better. Fear can and fear of the other. So I mean, these are hard, big issues that need a lot. There's a lot of heavy lifting here. And
The-
in our book, I mean, we have a chart in our book about I don't know if you're familiar with force field analysis, but it's where you look at a problem and you say, what are all the factors that are creating it, that are making it worse? And then you look at what are all the factors that are pushing against it that could make it better? And you start to pick apart the factors and say, which ones could we influence? Which positive factors could we increase and which negative factors could we decrease to create a better future. And I think that that's a powerful way to look at it. And, and we encourage, people who, read our book to sort of go through and say, okay, that's something I could work on. And it's none of this is easy. We're not going to do it overnight, and it is going to take a movement. It's going to take people saying enough. But I think some of it is more understanding of how we're being manipulated by the social media, more understanding of the way the political system is working and not working. And I mean, I think it's possible. But I think if our book, what I think about our book is and we want to give people hope. We want to give, I think, people the hope that it's possible. And we've talked about a lot of very difficult challenges, but and give people what can you do? And when we started with writing the book, we were thinking about how are we going to change our country. But then we step back, and I think this is something that Brave Angels needs to look at too. Is how do we let's just talk about positive relationships. Let's talk about how do we improve our relationships. And there's one of the workshops I love at Brave Angels is called Family and Politics. I think they roll it out a lot at Thanksgiving time.
Yeah.
But I think it would be great to, look at all of our relationships and what are the skills that we can use to improve our relationships. But then so we start with our country. How do we improve relationships? But then we took it down to one level further, which is how do we improve our own health, our own mental health? A lot of people are just so anxious and upset about politics. And how do you kind of step back and people feel hopeless? And how can you kind of step back, do some deep breathing, take a little more mindfulness and think about your own behavior and think about how you could feel better about yourself. And now that might contribute to better relationships and bettering our country.
Yeah, because I look around and I really do see most Americans, many Americans are just unhappy. They're unhappy not only with politics, but they're unhappy with the fact that they have to struggle to get health care. They have to struggle to, in an unsure economic environment, they have to, so I just see a lot of struggle going on. So it leads to my last question here. And I asked this one of your co-writer, Beth Mallow. The people who listen to this podcast and who joined Braver Angels and otherwise committed to civil discussion don't need to be convinced they have to take action to depolarize America. How do we reach people who have no idea the Common Ground movement even exists, or if they did have no interest in giving up their allegiance to a particular political party?
Well, I think we have to start by showing them that we care about them and that we're willing to listen to them and that we're interested in, okay, tell me more, tell me why you vote the way you do. I'd like to know more. I see people making assumptions all the time about other people. Or I hear some of my liberal friends saying that these people voted against their own self-interest. I said, well, how do you know that?
Mm.
You know, well, have you had conversations with them? Um, if we can connect with, at the end of the book, I said, we gave all this long list of action steps. And I said, well, maybe the most effective thing you could do is find somebody you don't know very well, but who has a different political view than you, and invite them to coffee and ask them questions. Ask them, trying to understand. Okay, well, let me understand your point of view on this. And if you're open, they'll at some point they'll probably listen to you too if you show that you care. And I think the last sentence in the book is two people changing the country, two people at a time. Now that a lot of people got to do that to make change, but I think that's where it has to start.
Mm. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk to me and to talk to other Americans about a brighter way forward at this time when it feels so dark. So thank you for giving me your
Well, I'd
time.
encourage people to go check out our Substack. It's Together Across Differences, or I think if you go Together Across Differences Substack, you Google that, you'll find it. But it's togethernow.substack.com, and connect with us. We've got 600 people who've signed up, and that's where we're going to have more information about our book, and we'll be inviting other thought leaders to share in this journey with us, and we'd love to connect with you.
Well, thanks to you and to those of you who listened to this episode. You can find a post and transcript of today's interview on my blog, vigilantpositivity.wordpress.com. So please join our cause and have a lovely day. Thank you,
Thank
Doug.
you.